Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net. Good evening, everybody. Quite a short show tonight, but a very interesting interview that came in at the last minute. We've been out filming all day for our forthcoming Windows on the World feature-length documentary production, The Heretics of London, the Smithfield Martyrs. That's Smithfield in London. Smithfield, which was just outside the old London city walls, a fascinating area. Done several shows on Smithfield, actually, all about what went on there, from the killing of Peasants' Revolt leader Wat Tyler to William Wallace being hung, drawn and quartered, to many, many heretics being burnt at the stake. We found the spot where the actual stake was. We've done loads of kind of research in this over the last few years, and I've done several shows on it. So we've been doing some filming for the documentary today, and what a strange day it's been. We arrived down there to do some filming with our Archbishop, our character, and who was there but Netflix with Warner Brothers, and they'd taken over the whole of Smithfield. So our little back alleyways were all taken up with lots and lots of film gear and people in yellow jackets. And I said, what's going on here? And the politically incorrect security guard says, I don't know, mate, some kind of chick flick. Well, Our film certainly isn't that. It's an in-depth look at what happened during the times of Henry VIII through to Mary I. And in a way, it parallels what's going on now. There was an act that came out in 1539. It was called the Act of Six Articles, and it related to the Eucharist, basically being the flesh and blood of Christ, literally, when the priest actually broke the bread and gave the wine out. And people who didn't agree with that, didn't agree that bread and wine was literally Christ, they were burnt at the stake. Yes, it was as simple as that. And the other issues around this were the real name of the actual act. It was an act originally entitled An Act Abolishing Diversity in Opinions. Get that? An act abolishing diversity in opinions. That's something to think about, isn't it? A bit like the online harms paper and the politically correct narratives that we're forced into when we are deemed to be outside the accepted area of discourse. We're deniers now. We're going to get into that tonight. Pretty shocking stuff, actually, what's going on. Look at our last show, UK Shamed into Stupidity. But yes, we're going to be doing more specials on Windows on the World. I want to bring you some really concise information about history and what's led to where we are now. And yes, this documentary, just to finish off talking about that, if you would like to help us out and be part of the film, please go to Patreon, which is linked to windowsontheworld.net. We've got a Patreon page with everything about the documentary, including some stills. We'll be releasing a trailer very soon. And you can help to support us and also get lots of special goodies, really, to do with the film, because we're going to be doing some screenings, some special talks on it, some tours down to Smithfield. And also, it's going to be a limited edition going out on a physical DVD. So if you'd like to be part of it and want to help us with our work, you can sponsor us at Patreon. Really what I wanted to do was give the listeners something back if they were going to sponsor us. And we do get a bit of help here and there. But the thing is with the talks that we're taking around is that we don't always make money. In fact, on a couple of them, we've actually lost money. And it's not because people haven't turned up, it's because of the actual expenses. So it is really necessary to basically support mainstream, the alternative to the mainstream, which is now becoming the mainstream media, which is the likes of us, really. And yeah, we're going to do a special on Wednesday, and it's going to be part 1 of 2, and it's called The Man Who Saw the Future. Wednesday night, 9 p.m, windowsontheworld.net. We're going to all the usual places after that. And there will be special uploads to Patreon too. So that's our next show is on windowsontheworld.net, 9 p.m. on Wednesday. We're still obviously going to be continuing with our Sunday shows, but I'm going to bring you some extra information in the form of these kind of special shows. So that's a fascinating one on Wednesday. And it really is essential information if you want to make sense of what's going on now. But yeah, our last show was actually quite prophetic. Well, it wasn't really prophetic because the template being rolled out of controlling public opinion and forcing all public servants into stupidity is all shockingly recent. Yes, our last show was all about UK shamed into stupidity, which is exactly what's happening. Now, basically, if you can imagine a grown-up actually announcing that there is a climate emergency when we're in a stable interglacial period, that's what I'm talking about. And more adults are taking the instruction of children who've been instructed by adults to tell them there's a climate emergency. We're going to get into a bit of that tonight. We have got an interview which is very fresh, just come in, and it's someone who's campaigning down in the West Country, and we're going to get onto that in about 5 minutes. But I'd like to get into our talks first. Next weekend, Hereford, the 14th. Yes, the bigger picture, the real citizens' assembly. That's what we've got to do. We have to go out and form real citizens' assemblies now, because these citizens' assemblies, as we've described in our shows, are a corporate rollout with an already decided outcome. So yes, Hereford, the 14th, it's the Steiner Academy, HR2 8DL. It's £10 on the door. If you want to pay in advance, I think you can. It's biggerpicturehereford@gmail.com. And yes, it's better if everyone pays on the door for that one. It's being put on by Chris down in Hereford at the Steiner Academy. And you can contact Chris at biggerpicturehereford@gmail.com. And there's a mobile number that you can phone, which is 07870 149 745. Now, getting into 2020, on Saturday, the 25th of January, we're in Fairbourne in Gwynedd, North Wales, at the Freog and Fairbourne Village Hall, Beach Road, Fairbourne, LL38 2EX. There is an Eventbrite bookings page at windowsontheworld.net and also a Facebook page. On that Facebook page, you will be able to see the world's leading expert in sea levels, Niels Axelmorner, who used to contribute to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change until he was so astonished at the inaccurate data that they were using from computer models that he actually stopped contributing. He's actually prepared a special paper why he stopped contributing. You can download that at windowsontheworld.net. But go to the Fairbourne Facebook page, which is linked to windowsontheworld.net. Do have a look at that, because you will see an interview or a section of an interview with Niels Axelmorner, which is part of a bigger interview that we did called Sea Level Rise is Fake News. Basically, it's about sea levels threatening coastal communities, and Fairbourne is going to be one of the test beds for this. They are going into, wait for it, managed retreat. That means everyone's going to have to move out in the next 30 years, and they're trying to bring this forward, remember. They're trying to get it all in by 2025 now, but it was the UN originally said 2050. They're depopulating coastal areas. They're going to be pushing people into smart cities. Fairbourne is a test bed for that. We have one of the world's leading experts in sea levels who would go to court for Fairbairn as an expert witness, and you can't do better than that. Now, we have covered this on the show before, about 18 months ago, and I'm quite looking forward to going down there and seeing what people really think, because there's no way anybody has to move away from the coast. Sea levels are not going to rise by meters. It's impossible and will never happen. And I think most sensible people would know that. But what they're doing is they're taking away coastal defences. They're saying we can't afford to keep up coastal defences. Well, they don't really need coastal defences. Most places have these sort of minimal coastal defences in place as it is. If they're talking about this level of sea rise, obviously the coastal defences wouldn't be any good, but it's just scaremongering and nothing else. Yes, on Saturday, 22nd of February, I think it's a Saturday, we're in Worthing, East Sussex, and there's an Eventbrite bookings page for that. Also, we've got some Scotland dates to be confirmed, and that's our friend up in Scotland, John, who sent me a load of information about the Scottish education system and how that ties into UNESCO tonight. I'm going to look at that and put that out on one of the shows in the next few weeks. But yeah, talking of extremism, which is now the mainstay of the climate change agenda, we have this interesting interview coming up. But first of all, let's get into the wilderness of the mind. Have you heard about this? We do talk about it in our bigger picture. The fourth world is the world that we are in at the moment, where everybody has basically lost their minds. It's the wilderness of the mind, which is going to be brought in by the new age, propaganda and drugs, and media manipulation at every level. And this is the wilderness of the mind, but it's also the wilderness of the world. The World Wilderness Conference is taking place next year, Wild 11. And 50% of the world's land and oceans are basically going to be privatised. Not many people knew that, but look it up, Wild 11. Taking control of land and seas, 50% of the earth actually. So do look into that. But talking about environmental extremism, I wanted to give you an example before we get on to our main interview this evening. Have you ever heard of an organisation called Earth First? They came out of environmental movements in the 70s, and basically a fella called Dave Foreman and several friends. Now, Foreman is believed to have coined the phrase Earth First, which is a lobbying group, a little bit like Extinction Rebellion, but Earth First is bigger. They're even bigger than Extinction Rebellion, and they lobby, they bring court cases, and I just wanted to give you an insight as to what is really going on here, the totalitarian endgame of what is being presented to the public as green and environmental. This is Dave Foreman of Earth First. My three main goals would be to reduce human populations to about 100 million worldwide, destroy the industrial infrastructure, and see wilderness, with its full complement of species returning throughout the world. Now, who would have thought that just 10 years later, that would become UN policy? Yes, it is UN policy, rewilding and population reduction. Now, initiating the process that would lead to the World Bank's Global Environmental Facility. Have you heard of the Global Environmental Facility? Well, if you listen to our show on Wednesday, The Man Who Saw the Future, you will then be armed with information which most people don't know, because it goes back too far. It goes back to 1987. And there was talk of a World Conservation Bank. And it wasn't being talked about by just anybody. Oh no, it was talked about by the multi-billionaire Maurice Strong, who organised the United Nations Conference on Environmental and Development, which became the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, with 20,000 paid actors there to push the climate change agenda. And that was not the beginning, but an intermediate phase in this environmental rollout. Now, what we have afterwards is the World Bank's Global Environmental Facility. And the World Bank is a trustee of the World Bank's Global Environmental Facility, so it carries out what the World Bank's Global Environmental Facility want. They're basically the same organisation then, really, aren't they? In a way, because the trustee has to carry out the wishes of the grantor, which is the World Bank. But the World Bank run the Global Environmental Facility. Interesting. Dozens of new public and private protected areas covering millions of acres of land. That's what it was there to achieve. And basically what the Global Environmental Facility does is they create debt. They lend money to help poorer countries mitigate against non-existent climate change. Now, we're not talking about the real weather here. We're talking about the threats and the prediction of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which have never, ever come true. So what they're doing is they're getting poorer countries into massive debt, and then they have to pay back the debt. So what do? They take over the country. It's quite simple. It's just a land grab. That's what this is all about. And it says multilateral efforts to restore and protect wilderness across national boundaries. In other words, it's above national government. So you get rewilding everywhere. Yes, even in Camden Town. Think about that. Camden have a rewilding policy too. So when you go to one of your local parks one day, you may find it closed and bears and wolves roaming around, because then it's been rewilded and you're not allowed in. I'm not really exaggerating here, This is actually where it's going to go, and it's already happening in certain parts of the country. But also, the Global Governance Summit. The Global Governance Summit was in 2019, February this year, in Dubai, and it was called Enablers for Achieving Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals. The annual gathering of the World Government Summit, held in February 2019 in Dubai, hosted over 4,000 participants and invites world leaders, international organisations representatives, thinkers, I can't believe that, and experts from over 150 countries. The World Government Summit is a global platform dedicated to shaping the future of governance worldwide. Shaping the future of governments worldwide. Also, they are about shaping future leaders. So those people who you're going to vote for in this election have nothing to do with this. It's above them, because the real leaders are not seen. The real leaders are selected and not elected. But yes, next year is the 11th World Wilderness Congress. It's an essential milestone on the way to the historic 2020 decision in China. Wild 11's goal is twofold. One, to influence the global decision-making process and, wait for it, create new leadership so we seize this critical moment in history. I'll just read that for you again, because most people don't know that these decisions are being made above their national governments. To influence the global decision-making process and create new leadership so we seize this critical moment in history. Number two, to take the ambitious and necessary step of agreeing to protect and interconnect at least 50% of Earth's land and seas. That's the land grab. Launching a BRICS-based, that's BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, leadership committee. Oh, so it's not democratic then. So they're going to launch a leadership committee and in-country social movements. Do you understand this, everybody? This is what Extinction Rebellion came out of. They're created. They're basically an anti-globalist front for globalism. So you have to control both sides. And they're an in-country social movement to influence policy agendas in some of the world's largest and most biodiverse countries. The Survival Challenge, a formal declaration signed by leaders from all sectors of society and all corners of the planet, calling for the United Nations to end the sixth extinction by protecting half of Earth, outlining what is expected of world leaders. So they're telling world leaders what to do on the back of a thing called the sixth mass extinction, which is not actually a factual event. Let that one sink in. It's not a factual event. Now, news just in. let's get down to what we were really going to talk about tonight. News just in about how the Green Party are controlling the narrative. Never. The Green Party, fake green fascism. Surely not. Well, we have exposed this before. The new totalitarian fake green agenda, we have talked about it in many shows. But the same template as your local council meeting is being used in the event we're going to bring you tonight. So do see our shows on citizens' assemblies. We've got one called Citizens' Assemblies, The End of Choice, Citizens' Assemblies, The Corporate Revolution. On our last show, State Actors Lying for a Living, which is very prescient because of the information that I received today. All this and more is in our talks, which cover every aspect of how your life is being engineered. So do book one through the website. So we talk about for who this is for what and why, and how it's being implemented. Because I think most people can see that there's a template going on here now. Even though we've been talking about it for the past 5 years, if you go back into our shows, we've described exactly how they do it. All public meetings are held using Delphi technique with facilitators, including your citizens' assemblies. Listen to our shows on that. They're using 3 companies. Involve are rolling out the citizens' assemblies. Involve are mainly funded by Open Society George Soros. So if we've got a government, why are they deferring their responsibilities to George Soros? That's an interesting point, isn't it? And it's even more interesting when you realise what the real aims of Extinction Rebellion are and what the real aims of this totalitarian movement actually are at the core. But we no longer have a government. All these decisions are made beforehand and the public are just steered into an intended outcome. So remember, do join us for that show on Wednesday, the 11th, The Man Who Saw the Future. It's absolutely fascinating and will reveal some information that most people don't know, and some quotes from people who were implementing this. And when you hear what they're saying, a lot of this will make sense. Yes, the cannon fodder. They talk about the human race as the cannon fodder, and that this cannot be sold, this program of totalitarian fake greenism cannot be sold as a democratic rollout. It has to be sold as something else. It can't be democratic. So they have to get your consent. And that's what this is all about. But yes, as they said at the World Government Summit, this agenda is the most ambitious and complex plan that the international community has ever agreed upon. Wow. And you didn't know about it? Well, you will now because it's in every town hall in the country. Yes. Redevelopment. Re-engineering of society. This agenda is the most ambitious and complex plan that the international community has ever agreed upon. Sustainable development must be at the heart of all policies, national, regional, local and also foreign policies. That's where they get it in. And remember, sustainable development can mean anything they want it to mean. That's the agents of the United Nations. So this agenda is at the core of strategic and political framework. It is not possible to reach our goals without the participation of all groups of people. Now, the way to get your participation and the way you get your consent is through steering you into an already predetermined outcome. We must plan and invest for something which is beyond the political cycle. Long-term strategies up to 2030 with a priority national investment plan. This will be the main tool to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, which is basically the re-engineering of everything that you thought was inalienable. In other words, your right to travel and also your right to life. Let that one sink in a bit because there's no right to life under this system. So, I'm just going to read you now something from Extinction Rebellion. You may find this quite interesting because one of their aims was to build structure, community and test prototypes in preparation for the coming structural collapse of the regimes of Western democracies, now seen as inevitable due to stored up crisis. I wonder if this has got anything to do with George Soros funding our democratically rolled out citizens' assemblies, which are already predetermined and the outcome's already decided. It couldn't be anything to do with that, could it? As Soros also funds Extinction Rebellion. It says, thus preparing a foundation to transform society and resist fascism and other extremes, which means Brexit, which means people who oppose fake green ideology, people who oppose being brainwashed by children who don't know what they're talking about. This includes creating Rising from the Wreckage, a citizens' assembly based on sortition. Who's running the citizens' assemblies? Sortition.org, along with Involve and My Society. Ipsos and Mori are doing the polls. We've done that, covered that in our last show. Do listen to that. And our shows on citizens' assemblies, everything you need is in there. Eric Von Essex has just put something in chat to lighten it up. I think he's made a very true statement. Is it mandatory to be ugly to be a member of the Green Party? Well, all the evidence seems to point that way. But I'm not talking about people who are ugly outside. I'm talking about people who are ugly inside, because a lot of this ideology has now become so extreme that these people are everything they're meant to be fighting against. Now, I'm going to play you an interview that I did earlier on with John Kitson. And he attended basically a Green Party brainwashing meeting, which was going to be rolled out using the Delphi technique, which is facilitators on tables steering you into a predetermined outcome to actually find out who the public were going to vote for, who was going to back up the Green Party. Would it be the Tories or Labour? Now, John Kitson was there, and he's trying to stand as an independent MP. He's campaigning against 5G and basically Agenda 21. And he wanted to get up and talk. They said, no, you can't. In the end, he did. And he seems to have interrupted the Delphi technique a bit because they didn't get round to putting everyone on tables and pretending to have a consultation. This is the interview I did with John earlier on today. Well, in actual fact, about an hour before the show.
Okay. So, yeah, basically I went to an event and it was called How Should Totnes Greens Vote? And it was basically a sort of lobbying event to basically handpick certain candidates. You had the candidate from the Lib Dems, Conservative and Labour. And although I'm running as an independent candidate, I was not on the list. So I went there anyway because we haven't had a hustings in Totnes, and this is the only hustings that basically we've had in the area. So it was my chance to basically explain to people why 5G is a real problem. And this hustings was basically focused on the climate emergency and, of course, Extinction Rebellion. So they basically wanted to know what candidates were going to do about CO2, when the targets were for reducing CO2, getting it to net zero, and what they would do about the climate emergency.
Right. So just tell us a bit about how the meeting was run.
Sure. Okay. So the host of the evening was Rob Hopkins, and he founded Transition Town Totnes and the Transition Network, which is basically promoting global warming and, you know, saying that CO2 is basically a pollutant. And the organizer of the event was South Devon Green Party, and the representative was Stephen Raid. And you also had the Totnes Mayor, Jackie Hodgson. Now, all of these people are promoting the climate emergency. You had 400 people there at the event, and it was announced as a public event for anyone to attend. And there was an event page set up on Facebook.
Right. So tell us a bit about what happened when you got there.
Okay, so I went there and I announced to the organizer and the host that I'm basically a candidate running in the upcoming election. And I met Justin Walker, who kindly came along to support me, as well as a friend of mine, Chris, Rhiannon, a couple of other people. And I announced that I was looking forward to participating because as a candidate in the general election, all candidates should be represented. And basically what this was is it's a hustings, but it's being controlled by a political party. And of course, it has an agenda that's being pushed. So I think the main reason they didn't want me on there was because I talk a lot about 5G and a lot of the green technology they're trying to push out onto our streets will be connected with 5G. So I connected with the organizers. I said, I'm looking forward to speak. And immediately I was told that I wasn't welcome on the speakers panel.
Is that what they actually said to you?
They said that basically you won't be allowed on the stage this evening because you were a climate change denier. You're showing hospitality to climate change deniers in Totnes town, and you don't represent the needs of the climate emergency.
Now, that's exactly pretty much paraphrasing what they said, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
That is pretty shocking. Now, the actual main thing here is that you've got all these idiots, useful idiots, all over the country now saying there's a climate emergency because they've been told to. But the point is, this was about lobbying the Green Party, telling you who to vote for, and they're also being instructed by Extinction Rebellion. Can you tell us a bit about that? Yeah,
sure. So basically, they gave all the candidates a fair say. They did have the Conservative candidate there, the Lib Dems and Labour, and everybody had equal time, including myself. But that was only after a lot of pressure, not just from myself and my other friends who came, and then also members of the audience, basically stating that they wanted me to speak.
Very good point, John. I just want to pick this up because this is what people need to do. They need to get their own people in there, and they need to form their own citizens' assemblies, and they need to start taking control, because this is the biggest problem, that people are not going to these events, and these events have actually got a predetermined outcome. So tell us what happened when you got on the stage.
Sure. So immediately we were asked questions to do with how would we deal with CO2 levels, basically any sort of question relating to the environment. And also we had Extinction Rebellion come up at the end and then ask us how would we abide by their 3 goals. Now, these aren't the same 3 goals they announced, a slightly altered version. One was about telling the truth. And of course, I thought, oh, that's not a problem. But then I also thought, hold on a minute. Why have they got this representative from Extinction Rebellion almost dictating to us how we should be making our policies and the citizens' assemblies? And I was openly critical of the citizens' assemblies because Extinction Rebellion will say, well, don't worry, these will be randomly selected. At the end of the day, someone has to make this selection. And when you've got power in the hands of a few, it's a very dangerous situation, and it's fundamentally undermining
the citizens' assemblies are being steered into the predetermined outcomes. We've gone through this on several shows, and I'll mention those when we put this interview out. But the point is that there's a predetermined outcome. Can we now get to that? What happened at the end, and what happened basically with the whole structure of the thing? I believe it had something to do with Delphi technique and putting people on tables with facilitators. Is that right?
Well, that's what the mayor said was going to happen. And I think that because of the delays regarding starting the event and me getting up on stage, that possibly prevented that, because what happened is 2 of the candidates left early, and that was Sarah Wollaston, the Lib Dem candidate, and the Conservative candidate, Anthony Mangnall. And what the mayor said was going to happen right at the beginning is that they would be separating into tables, into groups, and then they would then form one large group. And of course, this is what happens during Extinction Rebellion meetings, which is very much like, just as you said, the Delphi technique. And I think this is what the original plan was. But fortunately, by the time they got to the end of the discussion with the candidates, they didn't have that much time. So they just asked audience members to come up and speak on the microphone about who they thought would be the ideal candidate. And a lot of them ended up fighting over and arguing over whether the Labour candidate or the Lib Dem candidate should be selected to basically stop the Conservative candidate getting in. And there was no mention of the issues I raised about 5G. I just felt, okay, the audience are being encouraged to ask certain questions about this or that when they were coming up at the end. And I just felt, it wasn't a free democratic event. At the previous hustings I've been to in Brixham, it was completely open for the audience to ask any questions they wanted to the panel. But these questions had already been decided upon. And when Rob Hopkins was reading out these questions, they're all based around, okay, CO2, the environment. The audience didn't have any participation.
No, that's absolutely in line with the stuff that we put out every week, and that's great, John. Is there anything you'd just like to say in conclusion? Have you got any events coming up?
Yeah, certainly. So we've got Barry Trower, who's coming to Totnes, and he's coming on Wednesday, the 11th of December, and that's going to be at 7:30 p.m. at the Totnes Civic Hall. And the event information is on my website, www.5gawareness.com. And yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for having me on the show and for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. Because Barry, he hasn't spoken for a long time, but his background is in microwave weapons and microwave warfare. He's ex-Navy, ex-Secret Service, and he's going to be talking to us about the truth about 5G, the damaging health impact, and how 5G is basically a weapon system, which backs up exactly what Mark Steele's been talking about.
Yeah, well, the Internet of Things. Yeah, we're going into the bigger picture here. The Internet of Things, the fake Greens are behind the technocratic agenda, and this is basically what we're exposing to the public. So thanks a lot, John. I'll catch up with you soon.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Definitely. Look forward to it.
That was John Kitson there earlier on, and I wasn't actually going to do a show tonight. I was going to announce that we were going to do our special on Wednesday, which we are, Wednesday the 11th, but I thought that was really interesting information to put out. And also, I'd just like to read something that was sent to me a while ago regarding the Citizens' Assembly and the way all this is basically being pushed out with no real public consultation, just an illusion. Even on the XR official documentation, which is cagey about the details, it says, government must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. I wonder who injected this into their highly inactive and minuscule brains. Well, obviously we know. This is a globalist-backed, fake anti-globalist movement, which is really about undermining everything that people in Western so-called democracies used to hold dear until fake green totalitarianism took over. However, let's carry on with this. Yes, government must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. Now, basically, let's decode that. That means the common good, which means you don't have any rights, which means that you don't have any rights to life, you don't have any rights to property, and you don't have any rights to travel. Basically, it means that there's a totalitarian system in place and there's nothing outside it. There's no dissent allowed, which is what John Kitson was talking about there. He got called a climate change denier as soon as he walked in. This is a new form of Bolshevism, and these people are dangerously deluded. So it says XR have now produced a private members' bill to implement a version of their 3 demands. Obviously, this doesn't involve saying the government agrees to overthrow itself, but in the section where it deals with the Citizens' Assembly, even though it initially describes it as to advise the government, it does make explicit later that the Secretary of State has a duty. The Secretary of State has a duty simply to implement whatever proposals achieve a certain percentage of support of the Citizens' Assembly. And that's the sanitised version. Roger Hallam's pamphlet is the full throttle version that makes more sense in its own terms because it's not being delicate about saying what it means. So these people are there to overthrow everything that you actually hold dear or used to. If you like travelling by car and you need to visit relatives, well, forget that. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. If you like to go on holidays, on aeroplanes, well, forget that too. If these lot get their way, you won't be going anywhere. And also remember that we're talking about massive population reduction, but we don't want to scare people, so we don't talk about that too much. But this is information that I keep covering in different ways because it is so important. You've got one choice, no choice, unless people out there form their own citizens' assemblies. And some people are starting to do it. It's catching on. Remember, there's only 50 people in these citizens' assemblies, these fake ones that the government are sponsoring for George Soros. Let's have a look what's in chat, actually. I've got some nice comments in chat tonight. Eric Von Essex is at it again. He says, I'm starting a new political party, the Procrastination and Disorganised Party. I thought that was the Lib Dems, actually. Please vote for me on the 13th of December. Well, actually, I would. I mean, it's a shame that the Raving Loony Party seems to have disappeared a bit, because that is looking more like a real option, because they used to have some great ideas. In fact, instead of having think tanks, they used to have drink tanks. And I think even in Kent, there was a roundabout named after the Monster Raving Loony Party. Where has humour gone? Humour's disappeared, hasn't it? It just doesn't exist anymore. You don't get people dressing up in top hats and tiger skin suit, leopard skin suits even. Oh, it's disgraceful. What's happened to Britain? Yes. Let's have a look what else it says here. Mark, please come to Hertfordshire. This is Eric again. We are very friendly and always say pardon if accidentally breaking wind loudly in polite company. Well, some of the venues I used to do in Hertfordshire, they weren't that polite, Eric. So I think you may be actually generalising there a bit, you know. When you say we, who's the big we, you know? Are you talking about the consensus? Is that the consensus? Anyway, what's Eric Von Essex doing in Hertford? What are you doing in Hertford? Okay, then. Someone says, Scaramanga Bond says, I went to the Colchester one and it was excellent. That's our talk, by the way, in Colchester, our all-day talk. Myself and Piers Corbyn at that one, actually. If only to meet people that help you confirm you're not a nut job. Well, there is that, of course. I think that the real intellectual backbone of the country has to start coming together and meeting up at our talks. In fact, I think they are. We have a great audience of people. They're very intelligent and very open-minded. This is the weird thing, isn't it? Because it used to be the old-fashioned left that was meant to be tolerant. Now it's what the old-fashioned left used to call the right, which is weird because it's not really the right either. A lot of the old-fashioned left are now on the right because the left and right so-called paradigm does not exist anymore. There's only wrong and right. And the UK have been shamed into stupidity. Do take a look at that last show we did last week. There's so much information in there, and from a philosophical point of view as well. So yes, let's see what else is it. Yes, luckily I also caught the bigger picture in Salford, says Dino. Go if you can. Thanks a lot. I'm coming up to Manchester in the new year. I think it's on the 18th of January. We haven't sort of got the date yet. I'm waiting for Angie to get back to me with the date. Coming to Manchester on the 18th of January. So, looking forward to that. I always love going to Manchester. And I always meet great people there. Especially Steve and Angie, who've been brilliant. So, yes, let's see what else is here. Rewilding Camden Town conjures images of pissheads shouting at you at 3 a.m. in the morning. Well, yes, but that's the really wild version of Camden Town. It's a bit sanitised now. Do you know that when I last went down to Wetherspoons on Saturday night in Camden Lock, I was very appalled and had to be turned away because I don't carry ID. Why would someone of my age be carrying ID? Isn't that ridiculous? So yes, Camden Town's not what it used to be, but I remember used to get some quite rough evenings down there. Yeah, there was a fellow one night I remember, he pretended he'd broken his arm and there was all blood coming out of his arm. So someone took him to the hospital. I phoned back this person a couple of days later. I said, what happened? He said, oh, he mugged me. He wasn't really injured. So you're probably right, actually. Yeah, Camden Town could be rewilded. Let's rewild it back to how it was in the late 80s and to mid-90s. That was pretty wild. Yes, let's have a look what else we've got. 5G awareness. Loved his presentation in Oldham. That's John Kitson there. Right, hi mate. I'm going back to 20, 30 years ago, I confess. It's in a Birmingham museum. Humour, that is. Okay. Well, yeah, it could be. Well, maybe the Birmingham humour just moved a bit to the Black Country, you know. Could have done, couldn't it? I remember going to the NEC one night. We had a gig down there. And it's okay finding your way into that place. But if you go there in a bit of a hurry and you're late for your gig and you don't remember where your car is, you can be there a very long time. A very long time. Thanks a lot, everybody, for tonight. Do join me on Wednesday. That's the 11th. That's this Wednesday, the 11th of December. I will be doing a special Windows on the World. There's going to be several of these coming up, and this one's called The Man Who Saw the Future. It's absolutely fascinating. I've collated a lot of information together about somebody who was actually there and saw what was being rolled out in 1987 onwards, and he was trying to tell the world from 1987 onwards, and we play that in our talks, and people are absolutely amazed at what these people were planning. And guess what? It's all come true. We're in a dystopian nightmare. So it's still not that bad, though. We still have some freedom, but not very much. Now, I'll be back on Wednesday the 11th. Do come and see us on Saturday in Hereford at the Steiner Academy if you're there. It's only £10 on the door for the whole day. Myself, Piers Corbin, Sandy Adams. That's it from me. Thanks for listening, and join me on Wednesday the 11th. Please help us out on Patreon. You can become part of our feature-length documentary, which is going to be great. I'll see you all on Wednesday. Thanks a lot, everybody, and good night. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.